In this video, we'll create a complete Bootstrap website from scratch using Bootstrap 4, HTML5, and CSS3. Okay guys, so before we get started, I just have to thank you for all of the likes on the fixed background Bootstrap website I put out recently. I want to set a goal for this video because I think it's the best Bootstrap video I've made yet. So I'm setting a goal of 1,000 likes, and hopefully you can help me reach it so I can keep putting out better content. Okay, so let's take a look at the complete full-width version of the website here before we get started. Then we'll check out the mobile version. So at the top we have our logo, then the navigation on the right, followed by our image slider beneath it with the two buttons here and the heading text above. Then at the bottom of our image slider we have these indicator buttons that can bring us to and from the different image slides. And at the top you'll notice that when we scroll down, the navigation is called a sticky nav in Bootstrap, so it's going to stay sticky and fixed up there until we get down to a certain section of the website, then it will disappear. Okay, then underneath our image slider we have this Jumbotron in Bootstrap where we can feature some text in a button, for example. Then as we scroll down we have the 3-column section with the icons, this 2-column section with the image, fixed background image here. Then this cool feature with Bootstrap where you can have hidden content. So when we click on it, we'll have these emojis, which you can add optionally. Then beneath that, we have what's called cards in Bootstrap. So that's where we have the image, title, paragraph, and then the buttons beneath that. Then we have another 2-column section, this connect section with these font awesome social media icons we'll be adding. Then at the bottom, of course, we have this 3-column footer section at the bottom of the website. So let's scroll back up, and I want to show you how the different sections will resize as we get down to the mobile section using the Bootstrap grid system. So let's go ahead and size it down and take a look at the mobile width, and then we'll resize different sections to see when they transform from 3 columns to 2 columns or to 1 column. So at the top, let's look at our navigation here. So if we select our drop-down nav, it's going to lay out all of our navigation items, and then as we scroll down you'll find that at this width all of our sections have a single width, but as we scroll up some sections will turn into 2 columns, some sections will stay 1 width at the next breakpoint. So for example, as we scroll up, these sections are still staying 1 column, and then these icons here will go from a single column to 2 columns and then to 3 columns. Okay, so we're going to go over all of the different breakpoints in Bootstrap so you can make things flexed to different column widths as you're seeing here with the emojis. And I'm also going to include all of the different breakpoints inside of style.css for you, which we'll get to in just a second. So in the description of this video will be the Bootstrap website starter files that you're seeing here, including index.html and style.css. So I'm going to be using the free program called Sublime Text as my text editor while we build the website. And then I'm also going to have index.html open with Google Chrome as we're building it so we can see the development of the site. So also included in the starter files will be all of the images that we use throughout the tutorial, including the 4 GIF images that you see in this folder here. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and put this aside, and let's move over to Sublime Text so we can check out what's already included for us inside of the starter files. So let's take a look at style.css first, because index.html is where we'll start coding for the tutorial. So at the top of style.css we have a Google font imported for us here. Then underneath that we have some media queries laid out, which we'll reference later in the tutorial. Then we have a few fixes beneath that. So we have a fix for our image slider, which is the carousel, and then a fix for our fixed background image that we'll be scrolling over. Then we have a fix for the padding for the responsive Bootstrap. Then at the bottom here we have a invisible comment in CSS laying out where all of the breakpoints are in Bootstrap, so from the extra small point all the way up to extra large. Okay, so we'll be referencing that throughout the tutorial. Let's go over to index.html now. So from the top we have doc type HTML, then our language English, then inside of our head section we have our character set standard UTF-8, then width device width initial scale 1 for mobile websites, followed by the title of our website. Then underneath that we have our Bootstrap CSS file for Bootstrap 4, then the latest version of jQuery, followed by the latest version of Popper JS, and then the latest version of Bootstrap.js here, followed by Font Awesome, which will allow us to use the social media icons that we're seeing here at the bottom of the website. And then lastly, inside of our head section, we have the reference to style.css. Then already included in the body section will be HTML comments for each one of the sections of the website that we'll be laying out to make it easier for us. Okay, so I'm just going to type in some dummy text here to make sure I'm connected to Google Chrome, which I am, as you can see here. And then let's go ahead and get started with our first tag, which will be the header that we're seeing here for our navigation bar, or the navigation itself. Okay, so let's go over to index.html and then we'll get started underneath the navigation comment here. So we'll start with the HTML5 tag nav, and then we'll add our Bootstrap classes. So the first one is navbar, and then we'll have navbar-expand-md. So we're referencing MD because that's the breakpoint at 768 pixels, as we see here, where it's going to change from the mobile navigation to the expanded full width navigation. And then we'll have navbar light and BG light, which is the light Bootstrap navigation with the white background and the dark navigation item text. And then also we'll add sticky-top as opposed to fixed because we're using the sticky navigation. Next we'll add our div class container for our Bootstrap container. So this is going to be container fluid, so it takes up 100% of the screen, and we'll be referencing that throughout the tutorial. So underneath that, what we'll do is add our logo first. So if we refresh, we can see a little bit of the nav light up there, navbar light. So let's add a class navbar-brand for our logo, and then we'll add our link. So I'm just going to do the hashtag, but you can do index.html, for example, here. And then we'll add our image here for the logo. So that's going to be img/logo.png, since we're in the img folder there in the starter files. And then we can close out our link tag, the A tag there, and here we have our logo displaying. All right, so let's go ahead and move over to our navigation button here. So we'll reference that with the HTML5 button tag, and then we'll give it a class here. So we're going to say class navbar-toggler, since this is our toggle switch basically for our navigation, and then type button and data-toggle collapse, because our navigation will be collapsing, opening and collapsing. And then we'll say data-target, hashtag navbar, and then capital R in responsive. So we'll create that ID, the div ID for that in just a moment. Okay, so now if we refresh, we'll have the start of our drop-down button here. So let's go ahead and add our icon. So in Bootstrap 4, all we need to do is add a span class here. as opposed to a line for each bar in the icon. So we'll say span class navbar-toggler-icon. Okay, so now if we go and refresh, there we have our navbar icon completed. So let's go ahead and add a class for our collapsible navbar now, and then we'll add the ID for our data target for the navbar button. So we'll say div class collapse navbar-collapse. Okay, and then inside of the same div we'll add an ID, and it's going to be the navbar responsive with the capital R. Okay, so you can drop down and close out the div, and then inside of here we'll have our unordered list. So UL class navbar-nav, and then ML-auto. So ML-auto is going to push our navigation when it's at its full width off to the right hand side as opposed to having it in the middle. So as you can see here, at full width we have the navigation pushed off to the right hand side. Okay, so next we can go ahead and add our list items. So let's start with the first one with li class nav-item, and we'll make this the active navigation item in just a second with an active class. But first let's go ahead and lay out the rest of it with a class nav link, and then we'll add our link here. So I'm just going to leave it blank for now, and then you can write your text for the first navigation link and close out the list item. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this and paste it. I'll be doing that here and there throughout the tutorial to save us some time. Okay, and then I'll add the active class here for the first one, and if we refresh, there we have the active class darker than the rest. So let's go ahead and fill out the rest of these navigation items with about, and then we have services, team, and then the last one is connect. Okay. Alright, so there we have all of our navigation links. Later in the CSS, we'll make them a little larger and space them out a little bit to look like the original here. So now let's drop down and get started on our carousel image slider. Okay, so we can go underneath the image slider, HTML5 comment, and we'll start with our div ID slides, and then we'll give it a class called carousel space slide, and then we'll say data-ride carousel. Okay. And then before we add our images, I'm just going to drop down and close out the ID here. What we're going to add will be our carousel indicators. So those are the links at the bottom of the image slider, let me just show you here, that bring us to different slides. So we'll go ahead and reference those first here. So we'll say UL class carousel-indicators, and then we can close out our unordered list. And then inside of that we'll have list items. So we'll say li data-target, and then we'll reference the div ID that we just created called slides. So hashtag slides, and then data slide 2, and the first one will be 0. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and just copy this and paste it 3 times for each navigation slide with the link beneath. And then I'll change the first one to class active. Alright, so we're not going to see those pop up yet until we add our images, so let's go ahead and do that. So we'll start with div class carousel inner, and then close out our div. And then inside of that we'll have our first carousel item. So div class carousel dash item, and then we'll have our image inside of the div. So it's going to be image source Okay, and then we'll reference the img folder. And our carousel images will all be background.png, with the second being background 2 and the third being background 3. So I'll go ahead and copy this and paste it twice over. Okay, and then we'll just change the image extensions here. And I'm going to make the first one the active class. Alright, so now if we refresh, the images are way outside of the finished version dimensions for the image slider, but we can see the carousel indicators at the bottom already. Alright, so let's go ahead and add our content that sits on top of our slider now. Okay, so the first thing that we'll need to do for this is we'll need to wrap it with a div class. So we'll say div class carousel-caption, and then we can close out our div. And the first thing that we'll add will be our heading 1 where it says Bootstrap. So we're going to use an h1 class and we're going to say display-2. So Bootstrap has display classes which makes the text large and a lightweight, as you can see here. So you have display 1 to 4, so 2 is one of the bigger ones. And now let's add our heading 3 beneath that. So H3 complete website layout. And then we'll have our first button underneath that. So we'll say button type button, and then we'll give it its class here with btn, and then btn-outline-light, and then btn LG for large. Okay, so now if we refresh, there we're seeing the beginnings of our outline button. So let's just write view demo here for the first button, and then we can add our second here. Okay, so again, this is going to be type button, and then for the class it will be btn and then btn-primary, and again we'll use button large. Okay, so by default the primary button is going to be the blue shade, and then so later in the CSS we'll give it the Bootstrap purple shade that we see a few times throughout the tutorial right here. Okay, so the next thing that we'll do is let's drop down to our Jumbotron that we see here. So we'll go down underneath the Jumbotron class, or comment rather, and we'll start it off with a div class container-fluid, and then we'll have our div class row, and then we'll also reference the Jumbotron class here. Okay, and then we can close out our divs. Then inside of our div class row, we only really need to reference the Bootstrap column width where it goes from a single column to the next, so a 2 column width or a 3 column. But what we're going to do for the first couple of sections here is we're going to reference all of the div class columns here. So we'll have the extra small for less than 576 pixels, and then we'll have the small followed by the medium, large, and extra large. Okay, so we'll say div class column dash XS dash 12. So at extra small widths, we'll have it take up 100% since there's 12 different columns in the Bootstrap grid, as well as at the small width, and then at the medium width, 768 pixels will change from full width to 9 columns, and then it'll stay at 9 columns for the larger screens at 992, and then at extra large it's going to change to 10 columns. Okay, so then we can close out our div here, and let's add our paragraph here. So we'll use p-class lead, which makes this sort of lightweight text here in Bootstrap rather than just a regular paragraph tag. And then I'm just going to paste in the info here for web hosting. And then we can close out our paragraph. Okay, so at the bottom there we have our web hosting information. And a quick plug, by the way, if you need web hosting to get your website uploaded to the internet, I'll have a link to the web host that I use in the video description. So if you need help with that, just leave a comment and you can use the link in the description. All right, so next let's add our button here. So again, we'll have this at 12 columns at the smallest width, and then 12 again for the small screens. And then at medium width, 768 pixels, will go to 3 columns. And we'll keep it there for large screens. And then at the extra large, we'll go to 2 columns, since that's all that's left with our paragraph taking up 10 columns. Okay, and then we have our link here for the button. And we'll write web hosting inside of it. And then we'll just give our button class btn-outline-secondary, and then btn-lg for large. Okay, so now if we refresh our Jumbotron here, we have it taking up the full screen until we get to 768 pixels, where it will turn to 9 columns for our paragraph there, and then 3 for our button. Okay, so next let's go ahead and drop down to the welcome section here. So again, we'll use the div class container fluid. So div class container-fluid, and then we're also going to add a class here. So you'll notice throughout the tutorial that we use this several times, and we're just going to call it padding. So we'll be adding some additional padding between the containers and rows here in Bootstrap. All right, and then row welcome text center. So row and text center are Bootstrap classes. Welcome is a class that we'll style ourselves later to give this section its width, among some other things. All right, so now let's add our div class here, and this is just going to be col-12 because it takes up 100% of the screen and all 12 columns. And then we'll add our heading 1. So this is going to be H1 class rather, display 4 rather than display 2. And then we'll just say built with ease. And then we can close out our heading 1. Okay, and then underneath that, what we're going to have is a horizontal rule. So later we're going to give it its style. For now we can just say HR here. And then let's add our next column. So this again is going to be a full width column. So we can say div class col12. And then we'll use the p class lead. And I'm just going to paste in the text here. Okay. Alright, so now if we go and refresh the version we're working on, we have our paragraph text there and our heading 1 displaying centered with the text center class, and we can move on to the 3 column section below. Okay, so let's drop down and let's again create our div class container-fluid, and we'll also add padding to this container, and then row text center, and then we'll also add padding to the row. Alright, so we're actually going to add padding underneath the horizontal rule that you see there. So we're going to use the Bootstrap horizontal rule called my4, and it's going to kind of create that light gray horizontal rule here that spans across the whole page. So HR class my-4 in between the closing divs for our container and our row. So we have padding on both sides of the horizontal rule here. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started with the first of our 3 columns here. So we're going to say div class, and let's use the single width column here. So we'll say col-xs-12 and then col sm6 because it's at half the width at the 568 pixel mark, as you can see here. And then once we get to 768 pixels, it's going to be 3 columns. So 1/3 or col-md4. So md for 768 pixels. And then let's go ahead and add our icon here. So we'll be using the Font Awesome icon reference. So we'll say iClass FAS and then FA-code and then close out your I tag there. And underneath that we'll have a heading 3 for HTML5 and then our paragraph text underneath. So as you can see, this is the difference between the regular paragraph text and the P-class lead. Alright, so let's go ahead and refresh. And there we have our code icon as well as our heading 3 and the paragraph. So if you do a Google search for Font Awesome icons, you can go ahead and just add any icon that you want here. Just pay attention to the classes that we use when we style our icons later. So I'm going to go ahead and just paste this section in here just once, and we'll change this to bold. Since there isn't actually a Bootstrap icon with Font Awesome, we'll just use the bold icon. And then I'll change this to Bootstrap, and then Bootstrap and Bootstrap 4, which is the latest version. Alright. And that's going to also stay the same as the first, where it goes from 1 column to 2 and then to 3. But as you can see here, the CSS portion will go straight from 1 column to 3 columns. Alright, so let's go ahead and change the columns here. So all we need is all we really need is col md4, but you can add col sm12 if you want also. Alright, and I'll change this to CSS and CSS3. And now let's go ahead and refresh. And looks like I missed something here. So this is actually FAB rather than FAS. Alright, so there we go with our CSS icon there. Alright, and then if we flex up, we'll go from the 2 columns to the 3 columns. Okay, so now let's go ahead and drop down to the next section, which is the 2-column section with the text on the left, and then we have the image on the right. So this is going to change after the 768 pixel mark, but we'll get to that in just a second. Let's go ahead and start off with our div class container-fluid, and then we'll also add padding to this container. And then we'll add our div class row, which will also have padding. Okay, so div class row, padding. And now let's add our div class for the column here where it changes at the large screen mark, which I believe is 992 pixels. Okay, so let's go back to index.html and we'll say div class, and we'll reference the medium one here. So div class call md12 and then call lg6. Alright, and then we can close out our div. And then inside of that, we'll start with a heading 2 where it says if you build it. So if you build it, ... And then underneath that, we'll have a few different paragraphs. Okay, so there we have our heading 2. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy and paste these paragraphs in here. All right. Okay, so then I'll paste the last one, and then we'll add our button, which if you remember from the button that we added, or the second button that we added inside or on top of our image slider, this is going to be the same as that, the primary button. So as we can see here, it's changing to the half width. Okay, so that is, yeah, there we go, at 992 pixels for the large screen. So if you want, you can go ahead and just get rid of this, and you'll find that nothing changes. So all we need to add is the column for the breakpoint when it goes from full screen to something other than that. Okay, so let's go back to the finished version here, and let's add our second column for the image that we're seeing here. Okay, so we'll say div class col-lg-6, and then you can close out the div, and inside of that we'll have our image. So img source img/, and the extension for this will be desk.png. And then we'll also give this a class here, and we're going to say image-fluid for responsiveness. Okay, so there we have it, and have it changing at the 992 pixel mark. And then I forgot to add this button that I was talking about. So the button is going to be a primary button once again. I'll just add a break in here to create some space before the button. So it's going to appear blue until we style it in the CSS. So we'll say a class btn btn-primary, and then I'm just going to write learn more in here in between our a tag. Okay, so there we have our primary button, just like the image slider button that we see here. Alright, so moving on down the page, the next thing that we'll add is, let's go ahead and add a Bootstrap horizontal rule, and then we'll add our fixed image background. Okay, so this is going to be HR class my-4, similar to the one that we added before, that spans the whole page and gives us that sort of light gray feeling, or color. And now let's add our fixed image background. So we'll wrap it with a figure tag, and then we'll have div class fixed-wrap. And then we can close out the div, and inside of that we'll have a div ID, and we'll just call it fixed. All right. So next, let's go ahead and add that hidden emoji section here. Okay, so we're going to use a button, and we'll just give it a class, and we can call it anything we want. So we'll just call it fun, and then we'll have data toggle collapse, similar to our navigation, and then data target, and we'll just call it emoji. So the ID emoji, and then the text, it just says click for fun. And then we can close out our button tag. Okay, so now let's go ahead and add the ID that it's opening up. So div ID emoji for the data target there. And then we'll give it its class collapse. Then we can close out our div, and inside of this we'll have our container. So div class container dash fluid, and then padding, and then we'll have our row. So we'll say div class row text center. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close out these divs, and then we can add our columns. So if we look at the emojis here, we'll find that they're going to go from the single, or rather 4 columns to 3 columns to a single column. So it's 12, 6, 3. So we'll just reference the 6 since we don't need the 12. So call sm6 and then call md3. And then inside of that we'll have our GIF. So we're going to give this a class called GIF, so we can give it a max width later in the CSS. And then we'll have our image source img/gif/, and this one is panda.gif. Okay, and then we can close out our div. And now if we refresh, we should have our first GIF image appearing here if we click on the button there. Okay, so there we have it. And since we don't have the CSS added for a max width right now, it's not going to display like the finished version. But let's go ahead and add the rest of them. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy this and paste it in a few times. And then we can change the name. So the second one is just poo for this guy. And then we have unicorn and chicken.gif. Alright. Okay, so that does it for the GIF section. And as I said, if we click on it for now, it's not going to appear how we want it, but we can still see it shifting at the widths. Alright. Okay, so the next section is going to be the Meet the Team section. So let's go ahead and get it started underneath the Meet the Team comment here with our container. So we'll say div class container fluid padding, and then for our div class row, we're also going to use that same welcome class we used earlier in the HTML, and then we'll have our text center class for the centered heading. So let's go ahead and create our column for the Meet the Team text here. So we'll say div class col12 because it's full width, and then we can close out our div as well as the one for the container and the row, and then we're going to use the display4 class similar to what we used above. So h1 class display-4, and then meet the team, and close out your heading 1 tag there. Then underneath it we'll have a HR horizontal rule that we'll style later on. Okay, so now if we refresh, we should be seeing our meet the team text down there. And let's move on next to our cards section. Okay, so with the cards sections, we're going to go from 1/3 to a single column at the medium width at 768 pixels. So let's start with our container here and then our row. So we'll say div class container fluid, and then padding, and then just div class row padding. Okay, and then you can close out your divs. And each card will be inside of its column. So since it's going to change at the 768 pixel mark, we'll say div class col md4. Okay, and then we can drop down and close out the div. And inside of that we'll have another div class for the card. So div class card. Then we'll close that out. And then we have our image class for the card. So this is going to be img class card-img-top, since the image is at the top rather than the bottom or the middle. And then source for our image will be img/team1.png, and they're all going to be team 1, team 2, team 3. Okay, and then underneath that, inside of our card, we'll have our card body. So div class card-body, and then we'll have our title and our text. Okay, so h4 class card-title, and then we'll just say John Doe, and then close out our h4, and then we'll have a paragraph class here for our card-text, and then I'll just paste in the paragraph here, and I'm just going to change this to John. I'm not sure how I got Joe in there. Okay, and then we'll have our button. So href, we'll just use the hashtag, make it a blank link, and then class btn-outline-secondary. And then I'm just going to write C profile here. Okay, so let's go ahead and refresh. And there we have our card, but the image is looking kind of odd. Okay, so for the image class, looks like I added imd rather than img. Okay, alright, so now it's not distorted. Alright, so let's go ahead and add the rest of our card info here. So we have Mary Jo and then Phil Ho. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this all the way to the col md4 class there. And then I'll change this to team 2. We'll change this to Mary Jo. And then I'll change the paragraph text here. Okay, so there we have Mary Jo appearing. And then let's go ahead and add Phil. Okay, so I'll paste in the 1/3 column here, change this to Phil Ho. And then I'll change his bio card text. All right. Okay, so Mary is appearing there twice, so let's change this to Team 3. And there we have all of our cards laid out, and if we flex down a little bit more, it's going to change to the single column width at 768. Alright, so next we have another two-column section where it goes from a single width to the two-column width at 992. So I'm going to go ahead up to the first one that we add because it's going to be pretty similar to this, and just copy it and paste it to save us some time here. So I'll paste that into the two-column section comment or underneath it, and we can get rid of the button here and the break. As well as the last paragraph, and then all we'll need to do is change the paragraph text and the heading too. So actually we'll keep that break in there. So I'm just going to change this to our philosophy, and then to match the original I'll change the paragraph text here. Okay, and then for the image, I'll change this to img/bootstrap2.png. Okay, so let's go ahead and check it out. And then we have our two-column section changing at the large screen mark. Alright, so let's move on to the connect section, where we have the heading followed by our social media links here. So our connect heading as well as the social media links will both be full width columns, and for the social media buttons we'll add the media queries to give it its responsiveness in the CSS. So let's start with our div class container fluid, and then we'll give it its padding, and then we'll have our div class row and text center, and then padding as well. Then we can close out our divs, and we'll add our first full width column here for the connect heading text. So we'll say div class col 12, and then we'll have our heading 2, and we'll just write connect, and then we can close out our div, and then we'll have another div class col12 underneath that for our social links here, but we're also going to add an additional class just for our social links called social. So col12 and then social, and we'll also give this padding. Okay, so we can drop down and close out the div. And now we'll add our links for our social icons. So you can put in your social pages here, facebook.com/w3newbie, for example, for mine. I'm just going to leave it as the hashtag though to make it simple for now. Okay, so inside of our link we'll have our I class, and then this one is FAB FA-Facebook. But let's copy and paste this out first, and then we'll change our extensions or add our social extensions. So the first will be FA Facebook, then we have Twitter, and Google-plus-G, and then Instagram and YouTube. Okay, so now if we go and refresh, it doesn't look right. We're seeing all Facebook ones here, so we're missing something. Okay, so looking at our code, it looks like I forgot the end of the I tag here, so I'll go ahead and just add that for each one. Okay, so now after refreshing, there we have our social links displaying for us. Okay, so the next thing and the last thing that we'll add will be our footer section at the bottom. So we're going to wrap this with the HTML5 footer tag. And then let's give it its div class, container fluid, and padding. And then div class row text center. Okay, and then we can close out our divs. And this is going to be a 1/3 section, so we'll use the column 4. So col MD4 for 768. And then the first thing that we'll add will be the image for the logo that we're seeing there. So image source, and then img / w3newbie.png. Okay. And then underneath that we'll have a horizontal rule here. So we're going to say HR class light, which we'll style later and give it its light color. And then we'll have a few different paragraph sections underneath. So first we have the phone number here, then the email address, and then we have the street, and the city, state, and zip code or postal code. Okay, so now we can move on to the next column. So if we refresh, it's going to look much better when we have the dark background and the light text. We'll be able to see the logo and the horizontal rule. Okay, so div class col MD4, and we'll start off with our horizontal rule class light, and then underneath that we'll have a heading 5 where it says our hours, and then another horizontal rule light. And then underneath that, we'll have a few different paragraph sections here. So P, and the first one is Monday, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. And then Saturday, 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. And then closed on Sundays. So Sunday closed. Okay, so if we refresh, there we have the second of our 3 columns. And let's move on to the last one now. So since it's similar to the second, I'm just going to go ahead and paste this one in here. And we'll change the paragraphs here to all city, state, zip code. Okay, so now if we refresh, there we have it. All right, and then lastly, let's go ahead and add the socket section, as some people call it, which is a section underneath the footer. So we'll say div class col 12 since it's full width, and then we'll have a horizontal rule, so HR class, and we're going to say HR class light, and then a heading 5 where we have the copy sign, so that's ampersand copy semicolon, and then w3newbie.com. Okay, so that does it for all of our HTML. And by the way, feel free to use this design. The copyright isn't intended for me to have some type of copy on it. It's just in there for the sake of the design. Alright, so let's move over to style.css and get started at the top here after our imported Google font with our first style. So the first thing that we'll style will be the HTML and body sections with a little reset style. So let's go ahead and reference HTML and body, and then we'll add our height and width at 100%, and then our font family, which as you can see up here is Poppins from Google Font, and then our backup font is Sans Serif. We'll also give it all of our font a color of 222, which is a little bit softer than black. Okay, so if we refresh, there we have the change in our font style, and it's a little bit lighter with sort of a dark gray. So the next thing that we'll style is, let's go ahead and style our navigation bar. As you can see in the finished version here, it's a little bit thicker and taller, so let's add some padding. So we're going to say .navbar to reference the navbar class here. So .navbar padding 0.8 rem. Okay, and rem and m, if you're unfamiliar, are similar. They're both based on the root font size, which is 16 pixels. So 1 rem or m will be 16 pixels. Okay, so if we refresh, there we have our padding for our nav bar looking just like the original. So next let's go ahead and add some padding to our list items. So we'll say navbar-nav li, and then we'll say padding right 20 pixels, or we can use about 1.3 or 4 m or rem. Okay, so that's looking like the original, but we also want to add some more size to our navigation link. So we'll reference the A-class nav link here with .navlink, and then let's change the font size to 1.1 m, and then I'm going to say exclamation point important. Alright, so now if we refresh, there we have the navigation items looking just like the original. Okay, so next let's drop down to our carousel or image slider. So we'll say carousel-inner img to reference the images, and we'll give them a width of 100% and a height of 100%. So they take up the full screen and we can see the whole image. Okay, so now we can finally see the whole image here. And next we'll want to style our caption. So here we have, rather down here, we have carousel caption as the class. Okay, so .carousel-caption, and we'll say position absolute, and we don't want it at the bottom, we want to push it upward. So we're going to say top 50%, and if we refresh, we'll see that it's still going to be towards the bottom. So we'll add one more thing. We'll add transform and translate y for our y-axis -50%. Okay, so now if we refresh, there we have it displaying right in the center for us. So next let's go ahead and style our heading 1 where it says Bootstrap to get it looking like the original here. Okay, so that's going to be the H1 right here. So we'll say .carousel-caption H1 since we don't want to style all H1s like this, and we'll give it a font size of 500%. Okay, and then we'll also want it to be uppercase. So text transform uppercase, and then we'll give it a text shadow. So we'll say 1 pixel vertical, 1 pixel horizontal with a width of 10 pixels, and then the color will just be black with the hex value 000. Okay, so it's looking like the original, and let's move on to our heading 3 underneath that. So we'll say .carousel -caption h3, and we'll give it a font size here of 200%, which is 2M or rem, and then font weight 500 to make it a little thicker here. And then for our text shadow, we'll say 1 pixel horizontal and 1 pixel vertical, and then a width of 10 pixels with the hex value for black. Okay, so now if we refresh, I messed something up. So let's change this one to 15 actually. Okay, so the shadow's a little better there now on the heading 1. And then for this one, it looks like I added too many 1 pixels here. So we just have horizontal and vertical now. Okay, so there we have our text shadow. Now let's drop down to our buttons. So let's add a little bit of padding here also. Padding bottom 1 rem. Okay, so there we go. So I know it's not the best practice to use, I'm using rem, m, percentage, pixel, but hopefully you get a feel for all the different measurements with me using them all here. Okay, so now let's change our primary button's background color. So let's use the hex value 6648B1, and then we'll change the border, which is inherent with the buttons with Bootstrap, to 1 pixel solid 563D7C, which is a bit of a lighter purple shade, or darker rather. Okay, and then let's change the hover color. So we'll say .btn-primary:hover, and we'll use the same styles here, basically, the background color and the border. So let's change this one to the 563D7C. Okay, so there we have it. And it's looking similar to the original, but I think I used the 664 for the border as well in the original here. So it's completely solid. Okay, so there we have it. And now that completes our image slider for now until we do a little bit of media queries. Let's drop down to our Jumbotron, and we'll want to get rid of some padding. So we'll reference the Jumbotron class here with .jumbotron, and then padding 1 rem. Okay, and then let's also give it, or take away rather, any inherent border radius it wants to give, because I think the Jumbotron by default has border radius. So border radius 0. Okay, so refresh, and there we have the width of it and the padding looking just like the original here. Alright, so let's drop down and move on to our welcome class next. So as you can see here, it's full width, but we want it to be kind of centered with a max width so it doesn't go off to the far sides of the screen. But before we get to our welcome class, let's go ahead and add the padding for the padding class that we added throughout the tutorial, as you can see here referenced along with the container fluid and the row class. So we'll say dot padding, and then we'll just say padding dash bottom to rem. Okay, so if we refresh, that's going to space out everything pretty nicely. So we don't need padding top on anything but the welcome class, so we'll add that in just a moment. Let's first give it its max width, and then we'll center it. Okay, so we'll say dot welcome for the welcome class, and we'll give it a width of 75%, and then we'll say margin 0 auto to center it. Okay, so now if we refresh, there we have it centered at 75% of the width. And let's also add some padding to the top of it, just above the built with ease text. So we'll say padding top to rem. And I should say by default, Bootstrap does use rem. Okay, so now let's go ahead and just style the heading, or rather the horizontal row for our welcome class. So dot welcome HR, and then border dash top 2 pixels solid, and we'll use the hex value B4 B4 B4, which is sort of a mid to dark gray color. And let's give it a width of 95%. So it doesn't span outside of the text beneath it. All right, and then let's also say margin top 0.3 rem and margin bottom 1 rem. So that's going to space out the bottom a little bit and take away a little bit of space on top. Okay. So that does it for the welcome class. Let's go ahead and drop down to the 3-column section here with our icons. So we'll want to resize and make our Font Awesome icons larger here, and then we'll change the color. Or let's change the color first, and then we'll make them all larger together. So for the first one, FA code will have the color E54D26, and then refresh, and that's not right, it should be orange. So E54D26, and there we go. And then let's change our bold class here, so FA-bold, and the hex value for this is 563D7C. I think it's the same purple shade that we use for the buttons, which is kind of the Bootstrap purple hex value. And then for the CSS3, the blue hex value is 2163AF. Okay, so they're looking pretty good, and now all we need to do is change the size, and we'll space them out a little bit from the text beneath. So we'll reference all 3 of them here with commas so we can apply the size and the margin to each one without doing them individually. So we'll say font size 4M, which is I think is about 64 pixels. Okay, and then let's add some margin all around to space them out from the heading 3 text underneath. So margin 1 rem all around. Okay, so that looks pretty good, just like the original. And the next section we don't need to do anything to. the 2-column section here, since we already made our primary button purple, as you can see there with the Learn More button. And then our fixed background image is already taken care of. So the next thing that we'll drop down to will be our GIF section. So first we'll make our button 100% width. So this is going to be the button class fun for the emoji section. So this will be .fun. We'll give it a width of 100% and then a margin of on the bottom to space it out from the meet the team text there of 2 rem. Okay, so that looks better. And next, let's go ahead and just give a max width to our GIFs. So we'll use the image class GIF here. So .gif and then max width 100%. Okay, so there we have them displaying like the original, and if we flex it down, it's going to change to 2 columns to 1 column. Alright, so the Meet the Team card section is all complete, as well as the 2-column section underneath. So the next thing that we'll drop down to will be our social media connect section here. Okay, so we'll want to reference the social class that we gave it. With .social, and then we'll reference the A for the link. So .social A, and then let's change the font size to 4.5 em, and then padding, since that makes them larger but we need some space. So we'll say padding all around 3 rem. Okay, so that looks much better. And we'll resize them to look like the original here when we get to the media queries. So next, let's go ahead and make each one their relative hex value. Okay, so for Facebook, the hex value is 3B5998. Giving it kind of that soft blue shade that we know of when we think about Facebook. And then let's add the lighter blue for the Twitter icon. So this will be FA-Twitter. And the hex value is 00ACED. Okay, and then for Google+, so Google-+-G, the hex value for the red shade is DD4B39. And then for Instagram, it's 517 FA8 for that kind of flat blue turquoise shade. And then for YouTube, the red color, which is pretty simple, it's BB0000. Okay, so there we have all of our shades. And then what we'll need to do is reference all of them at once. You can do individual hover shades. I'm just going to do them all the same hover shade here to make it simple. So I'll reference all the classes for our social icons with a comma in between each. And then we'll add the hover shade. So I'm just going to make this sort of a light gray shade. after I paste in the colon hover for each. So this will be the shade D5, 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 which as we'll see is sort of a light gray, similar to the W3 newbie icon where it has W3 in there. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. I actually forgot the horizontal rule here in between the connect section and the two column section. So if we go up, let's go ahead and add that in between the divs here for the container and the row, or the row and the container. So HR class my-4. So if we refresh, okay, so there we have it. And now let's drop down and style our footer. So we'll reference the footer with just footer, since we use the HTML5 tag for that. And then we'll give it a background color of 3F, 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 which is sort of a soft, dark gray, black color. And then we'll make all of our text color D5, 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 which is a light gray. Okay, so that looks pretty good. And then let's add some padding on the top of 2 rem to space it out some. And next, let's go ahead and style our horizontal rule. So HR light, and then we'll say border dash top 1 pixel solid, and then we'll use the same color, so D5, D5, D5. All right, and then let's also give it a width of 75%, so it doesn't take up the full column. So that looks pretty good. And then let's minimize the padding a little bit to make it a little bit less spaced out. And I use the R hours here for both, so I'll change this to service area like the original. And then let's say margin top 0.8 rem rather than the padding, and then margin bottom 1 rem. Okay. So that looks pretty good, except for the last horizontal rule here. We're going to make that different from the HR light. Also, our phone number. So the phone number we'll just reference with footer A, and let's keep the color D5, 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 because if we don't do that, it's going to appear blue, the default link color on cell phones when we look at it, or iPads, for example. So we'll say HR class light 100 for the last heading or horizontal rule, and we'll make it a width of 100%. So HR.light 100. And then let's just use the same style here, except we'll give it a width of 100%. Okay, so now if we refresh, there we have it. Okay, so that's all of our CSS for the full width version. So now we'll move over to some media queries to resize the carousel caption info, as well as some of our headings and the social links at the bottom. Okay, so let's drop down and let's use these media queries here. So I find that for the purposes of making tutorials, it's easier to use media queries like this with the max width rather than the min width media queries with Bootstrap, which basically means mobile first styling. So let's go ahead and get started with our first media query at the max width of 992 pixels. So let's go ahead and first change the size and the padding on our social icons. So we're going to say font size 4M, to bring them down from 4.5 on the full width version, and then we'll give them a padding of 2 rem. Okay, so now if we refresh, they're a little smaller here until we flex it up past 992. Okay, so that's all we're going to do at 992, so let's drop down to 768 next. And starting from the top of the website, let's go ahead and resize our carousel caption info. So that's going to be our heading 1, heading 3, and the buttons. So if we take a look at the original here, when we size it down, it's going to be a little smaller all around as opposed to what we have here. Okay, so we'll reference that with the carousel caption class. And to make this easy on ourselves, we can just copy our carousel caption heading 1 and heading 2, as well as just the carousel caption itself. Okay, so let's bring that down and paste it here in the 768 mark. And let's get rid of transform, translate Y, and position absolute, and we'll just say top 45% to bring it up a little bit here, a little bit higher to the closer to the top. And then for our heading 1, we'll change the font size to 350% from 500. Okay, so that's looking better already. And then let's resize our heading 3 text. So we'll get rid of the text shadow and we can leave everything else. So we'll resize it to 140%, and then we'll make the font size, or font weight rather, 400 rather than 5, and then 0.2 rem for our padding bottom. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Now let's move on to our buttons. So we'll say .carousel-caption.btn, and then font size 95%. So that looks better. And then we'll reduce the padding slightly. So we'll say padding 8 pixels top bottom and 14 pixels left right. Okay, so that looks good. And now moving on down the page at the 768 mark, the next thing that we'll resize will be our heading text here. So this is the display for text in our welcome section. So here we have h1 class display 4. So we'll say .display-4, and let's make the font size 200%. Okay, so that looks better. So it looks a little small here at this width, but most devices for the 768 mark will be smaller than this. And then scrolling down, that resizes our Meet the Team text as well. And now let's resize our social media links again for this width to make them a little smaller. Okay, so we can just copy this social A with the font size and the padding. And we'll change the font size to 2.5 em from 4, and the padding to 1.2 rem. Okay, so that looks pretty good. Alright, and then as you can see in the style.css file, we have one more media query at 576 pixels. So this is basically the extra small width with Bootstrap. So it's going to apply to anything under 576. So let's start off with our carousel caption info here. So what we can do is once again copy and paste our carousel caption classes into the 576, and we'll change the top to 40%, and then this to 250, and then we'll change our font size to 110 for the heading 3, and then for our button we'll change it to 90% with 4 pixel top bottom, 8 pixel left right. Okay, so that looks better. And then also, if you haven't noticed, once we get down to 768 or 576 rather, the carousel caption indicators will, or just carousel indicators will disappear. So we'll say display none. Okay, so now if we refresh, they've gone away. And then we'll do our display for and our social icons. Okay, so I can just copy them from 768 and paste them in here, and we'll change the display for font size to 160. And then for our social icons, we'll change them to 2 rem. And we'll change our padding for them to 0.7 rem. Okay, so that looks pretty good. So let's go ahead and scroll up and we'll take a look at the finished version here, because that concludes all of our HTML and CSS for the entire tutorial. So that does it. I want to thank you for watching. Please remember to like this video, subscribe if you haven't already, leave a comment, turn on your notifications, and I'll see you in the next tutorial. Thanks for watching.